Peter Schneider, an orphaned heir and multimillionaire, allowed a couple of war refugee grandparents with their two young grandchildren to live in his garage at his country home. But he never imagined that. What hidden truths will emerge when a young, orphaned millionaire offers refuge to a family of war survivors? Stay tuned to uncover the unexpected twists that change everything. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Peter Schneider stood at the edge of the balcony of his sprawling countryside mansion, a grand structure that echoed with the silence of solitude. The late afternoon sun bathed the lush Bayerish fields in a golden glow, each blade of grass swaying gently in the breeze. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding him, a heavy sense of loneliness clung to Peter like a shadow. The vast estate, once filled with laughter and life, felt uninviting and cold since the tragic accident that took his parents away. He could still recall the warmth of their presence, the way they used to stand beside him on this very balcony, their voices mingling with the rustling leaves, sharing dreams about the future that now felt so distant. "Peter, come inside. You'll catch a chill," his mother would call, her voice laced with laughter, as she ushered him back into the safety of their home. But now, those echoes were replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to mock his wealth and status. An orphan at 35, he had inherited millions, yet it felt like a gilded cage, beautiful but isolating. He leaned against the wrought iron railing, his gaze drifting over the horizon where the fields met the sky. A flock of birds took flight in the distance, their freedom a stark contrast to his own. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to connect with something or someone beyond the walls of his mansion. He had spent years building a fortress around himself, believing that solitude was the price he had to pay for safety and security. But now, he questioned whether it was worth the cost of his humanity. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Peter turned his thoughts toward the world beyond his estate. News of the ongoing war had seeped into even the most secluded corners of Bavaria. He had seen reports on television, images of desperate families fleeing their homes, children clinging to their parents, and the haunting expressions of those who had lost everything. Each story tugged at a long-buried sense of empathy within him, a flicker of a desire to help. "How can I just stand here while others suffer?" he muttered to himself, his heart racing with a newfound purpose. The idea of helping a family in need ignited something dormant within him, a longing for connection that he had buried under layers of grief and isolation. That night, while the wind howled outside, Peter sat at his grand dining table, his plate untouched. The shadows danced around him, and he thought of his garage, large and unused, filled with old tools and forgotten memories. It was a space that could serve a greater purpose, a refuge for someone in need. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle in. He would offer it to a family, a chance for them to find shelter, and perhaps, in turn, he would find a sense of belonging. The following day, with resolve coursing through his veins, Peter made a call to a local charity that assisted war refugees. The woman on the other end of the line, her voice warm and compassionate, listened intently as he explained his desire to help. "Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Your generosity will make a significant difference," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "We have a family in need, a couple with two small children who have just arrived. They've lost everything, and your offer could provide them with a safe haven." Peter's heart raced as he listened, a mixture of excitement and anxiety flooding his senses. "I'll make sure everything is ready," he promised, his determination unwavering. As he prepared his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this act of kindness might be the very thing he needed to fill the hollow space within him. He cleaned out the garage, clearing away years of dust and neglect. He painted the walls in soft pastel colors, creating a welcoming atmosphere. He stocked the small space with essentials, bedding, food, and toys for the children, hoping to create a sense of comfort for the family that would soon arrive. Days passed, and anticipation grew within him. Peter found himself daydreaming about the laughter of children echoing through his home, the warmth of shared meals, and the stories that would weave their lives together. He envisioned the family sitting around his dining table, their faces lit with joy and gratitude. It was a vision that filled the void inside him, even if only for a fleeting moment. Finally, the day arrived. Peter stood at the entrance of his garage, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. He had dressed carefully, donning a casual button-up shirt and jeans, trying to present himself as approachable rather than the reclusive millionaire he had become. He waited, glancing at the clock, aware that time felt like it was dragging on. Then, he heard the sound of a car approaching, the soft crunch of gravel beneath tires. A modest vehicle pulled into his driveway, and Peter took a deep breath, his palms slightly sweaty. The doors swung open, and a couple stepped out, their faces etched with exhaustion but also relief. Hans and Greta Myler, refugees from a war-torn country, stepped into his life. "Mr. Schneider?" Hans asked, his voice thick with emotion as he approached, his hand extended in gratitude. "Thank you for this opportunity. We don't know how to express our gratitude." Peter shook Hans's hand firmly, feeling the weight of their situation in that simple gesture. "You don't need to thank me. I'm glad to help. Please, come in," he said, gesturing towards the garage. As they entered, Peter's gaze fell on the two children peeking shyly from behind their grandparents. Anna, with her curious brown eyes and wild curls, took a hesitant step forward, while Lucas clung to Greta's leg, his small hand gripping tightly as if afraid to let go. "Hello there," Peter said, kneeling down to their level, a smile breaking across his face. "I'm Peter. What are your names?" "I'm Anna," the girl replied, a hint of shyness in her voice, yet a spark of curiosity flickered in her eyes. "And I'm Lucas," the boy added, his voice barely a whisper. Peter's heart melted at their innocence. "It's wonderful to meet you both. I hope you'll feel at home here." Greta stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "We have lost so much, but your kindness, thank you, truly," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Peter nodded, feeling a warmth spreading through him. "You're safe here. We'll figure everything out together," he reassured them, a sense of determination swelling within him. As they settled into their new surroundings, Peter observed the way Hans and Greta interacted with their grandchildren. Gentle touches, soft whispers, and the kind of laughter that felt like a balm for old wounds. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again, filled with the promise of new beginnings. "Can we play outside?" Anna asked, her voice brightening the atmosphere. "Of course. There's a big garden out back," Peter replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "You can explore as much as you like." As the children raced outside, laughter ringing through the air, Peter felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was the connection he had been searching for, a chance to become part of something greater than himself. In the midst of their struggles, he found solace in their resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could flourish. With each passing moment, the bond between them grew stronger, and Peter began to understand that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and love. Little did he know, the act of kindness he extended would unravel secrets that intertwined their lives in ways he could never have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Peter Schneider found himself slowly drawn into the vibrant world of the Mahler family. The once quiet halls of his sprawling country home began to echo with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the solitude that had enveloped him for so long. One sunny afternoon, Peter stood in the garden, the scent of freshly turned soil filling the air. Lucas, with his small hands, was digging a hole in the ground, trying to plant a sunflower seed that Peter had given him. The boy's brow was furrowed in concentration, and Peter couldn't help but smile at the earnest effort. "Like this, Lucas," Peter said, kneeling beside him. "You want to make sure the seed is deep enough, but not too deep. Plants need air, just like we do." Lucas looked up, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Will it grow tall, like you?" he asked with an innocent sincerity that tugged at Peter's heart. Peter chuckled softly. "Maybe taller. Sunflowers are very strong. They always turn to follow the sun." The boy nodded, his small hands moving with renewed purpose. "I want to make a garden like the one in Grandma Greta's stories, with lots of flowers and butterflies." "Then we'll make it together," Peter replied, feeling a warmth spreading in his chest. The bond he was forming with Lucas was unlike any he had experienced before. It was as if the boy was planting seeds of joy in his heart, ones that he had almost forgotten existed. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Anna was helping her grandmother, Greta, prepare dinner. The air was filled with the rich aroma of simmering vegetables and spices. Greta hummed gently as she chopped, her hands moving deftly, while Anna stood on a stool, her small fingers mixing batter for a cake. "Is it okay if I add more sugar, Grandma?" Anna asked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Greta raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Only if you promise to share it with your grandfather later. We wouldn't want him to get too much sugar, would we?" Anna giggled, her voice light and airy. "I promise. Opa will love it." As they worked together, an unspoken bond blossomed between them, one that transcended the boundaries of age and culture. Greta found herself reminiscing about her own childhood, the kitchens filled with laughter and the sweet smell of baked goods, and she felt a sense of joy for the first time in a long while. When the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the countryside, Peter called everyone to the dining table. The warmth of the day lingered in the air as they gathered, their plates filled with colorful dishes. "Thank you for the food, Opa," Anna exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. Greta smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's a team effort. We all contributed today." "Indeed," Peter said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings and family." "To family," echoed the others, clinking their glasses together. The sound resonated with a warmth that filled the room, a silent promise of togetherness despite the challenges they faced. As they shared stories around the table, Peter felt a sense of belonging that he had never known before. The laughter, the playful banter, the way Hans and Greta exchanged knowing glances, each moment stitched a thread into the fabric of their shared lives. Yet, beneath the laughter, Peter sensed an undercurrent of something unspoken, a hint of shadows that lingered just beyond the light. Later that evening, as Peter sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting playful shadows on the walls, he found himself unable to shake the feeling that there was more to the Mahlers than met the eye. He had noticed Hans occasionally gazing into the distance, a heavy expression clouding his features, as if he were wrestling with memories too painful to share. Curiosity gnawed at Peter, and he made a decision. He would approach Hans, hoping to understand the man who had become part of his life in such an unexpected way. The following day, Peter found Hans alone in the garden, tending to a small patch of herbs. The sun shone brightly, but there was a heaviness in the air, a silence that felt almost tangible. Peter approached slowly, not wanting to intrude. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice steady. Hans looked up, his expression softening. "Not at all, Peter. I could use the company." They worked side by side for a while, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Finally, Peter broke the silence. "I've noticed you seem lost at times. If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm here." Hans paused, his hands stilling in the soil. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, Peter thought he might share his burdens. But instead, Hans shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. "It's nothing, really. Just memories I'd rather keep buried." Peter's heart sank a little. He knew that pain often thrived in silence. "You don't have to carry it alone, Hans. We're family now, and family supports each other." Hans looked at Peter, a flicker of gratitude mingling with hesitation in his eyes. "I appreciate that, Peter. It's just, some things are hard to explain, especially to someone who hasn't lived through them." The weight of Hans's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Peter nodded, respecting the boundaries that Hans was setting but feeling a sense of urgency to understand, to protect. As the days passed, Peter's concern deepened. He often caught Hans speaking in hushed tones with Greta, their faces serious as they exchanged furtive glances. He wondered what secrets lay behind those closed doors and what dangers they had fled from. It was during one of these moments, late one night, that Peter overheard Hans speaking softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were safe, but they're relentless, Greta. We can't let the children know." Peter's heart raced as he strained to catch every word, the implications sending a chill down his spine. What had they fled from? What dangers loomed in the shadows of their past? The following morning, Peter decided to take a walk around the property, hoping to clear his mind and perhaps gather the courage to confront Hans about the mysteries that surrounded them. As he strolled along the tree-lined path, he spotted a figure lurking near the edge of the woods, half hidden by the underbrush. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and despite the distance, Peter felt an instinctive sense of unease. With each step, the figure shifted, as if sensing Peter's gaze. The moment their eyes met, Peter felt a jolt of recognition, though he could not place it. The figure quickly turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Peter standing there, heart racing and mind racing with questions. Returning to the house, Peter felt a surge of protectiveness for the Mahlers. No longer could he ignore the shadows that clung to their lives. He needed to understand the dangers that lurked beyond their newfound peace. The warmth of family was too precious to let fear dictate their lives. As he approached the house, he resolved to speak with Hans, to uncover the truths that had been concealed, and to protect the family he had unknowingly come to love. It was time to confront the past, to face the secrets that had woven their lives together, and to ensure that the light they had found together would not be extinguished by the darkness of yesterday. The sun hung low in the Bavarian sky, casting a warm golden hue over the sprawling estate of Peter Schneider. The peaceful ambience was occasionally interrupted by the sounds of distant laughter from the garden, where Anna and Lucas were playing. Inside the house, however, the atmosphere was charged with an undercurrent of tension. Peter felt it acutely, especially after the recent strange occurrences that had unsettled his newfound family. Peter found himself pacing back and forth in the grand living room, his mind racing with thoughts of the mysterious figure he had seen lurking around their property. The shadows of doubt crept into his mind, leaving him feeling increasingly concerned for the safety of Hans, Greta, and the children. The once tranquil setting now felt like a fragile facade, masking something darker. With a determined resolve, Peter decided it was time to confront Hans. He walked down the corridor, the hardwood floors creaking softly underfoot, and knocked on the door of the small room where Hans had retreated earlier. "Hans, can we talk?" Peter called, attempting to keep his voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling within him. "Of course, Peter," Hans replied, his voice calm but tinged with an edge of weariness. Just a moment. Peter entered the room, finding Hans seated at a modest desk cluttered with papers. The glow of a single lamp illuminated his weathered face, revealing the lines etched by years of hardship. Hans looked up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and concern as he set down the pen he had been using. "What's on your mind?" Hans asked, folding his hands together. Peter took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen someone outside, lurking around the property. I'm worried about your safety, about all of you. We need to talk about what's really going on." Hans's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of apprehension crossing his features. "I appreciate your concern, Peter, but I assure you, we are safe here. The war is far away, and we have left that life behind us. But have you really left it behind?" Peter pressed, unable to suppress the urgency in his voice. "You've hinted at secrets, dangers that forced you to flee. If there's something more I should know, I need you to tell me." Hans leaned back in his chair, the weight of Peter's words hanging heavily in the air. "I understand your worry, but not everything can be shared so easily. Our past is complex, and some things are better left buried." Peter's frustration mounted. "I can't help you if I don't know what we're dealing with. I've opened my home to you, and I'm willing to protect you, but I need to know what I'm protecting you from." Hans sighed deeply, the lines on his face deepening as he considered Peter's plea. "You're right," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve to know. But it's not just my story. It involves many lives, and some of those lives are still in danger. Just tell me what you can," Peter insisted, his heart racing at the thought of the dangers lurking in the shadows. Hans leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Back in our homeland, I was involved in political activism. We spoke out against the regime, and that made us targets. When the threats became too serious, we had to leave everything behind. Our home, our friends. We fled to protect our family. Peter felt a chill run down his spine. So the threats are still following you? Hans nodded solemnly. It's possible. The people we angered don't forget easily. But I thought we had escaped. Just then, the door creaked open and Greta peeked in. Her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Is everything all right? She asked, sensing the tension in the room. We're just having a discussion about safety, Peter replied, his tone softening. I'm just trying to understand how to keep you all safe. Greta stepped inside, her eyes darting between the two men. I appreciate your concern, Peter, but we must remain hopeful. We have each other, and that gives us strength. Peter nodded, taking a moment to gather himself. Yes, I believe that. But I can't shake the feeling that we're not out of danger yet. As the conversation continued, Peter's protectiveness surged. He felt a fierce determination to shield them from whatever demons haunted their past. The thought of losing them struck a chord deep within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. Later that evening, under a sky sprinkled with stars, Peter decided to change the mood. He gathered Anna, Lucas, and the rest of the family for a campfire in the garden. The crisp night air was invigorating, and the flickering flames cast a warm glow, dancing shadows across their faces. Let's tell stories, Peter suggested, drawing the children's attention. Anna, would you like to share something about your homeland? Anna's eyes lit up. Oh, yes. I have many stories. She took a moment, her gaze drifting as though she could see her past and the stars above. In our village, we had a big lake. I loved to swim there with my friends. We would spend hours playing and splashing in the water. What was your favorite game? Lucas asked, leaning forward with excitement. We played a game called The Fish and the Fisherman, Anna explained, her enthusiasm infectious. One person would pretend to be the fisherman, and everyone else would be fish swimming away. It was so much fun. Peter listened intently, a smile creeping onto his face as Anna's laughter echoed in the stillness of the night. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget the weight of their current situation. He found joy in the simplicity of the moment, the warmth of their company. As the stories flowed around the fire, Peter reflected on his own childhood, filled with laughter and innocence. He remembered the days spent playing in his family's garden, the laughter of his parents echoing in his heart. The contrast between his lost past and the warmth of the Mahler's presence filled him with a bittersweet longing. Peter, what about you? Greta asked, pulling him from his reverie. Do you have a story to share? He hesitated, the memories tugging at his heartstrings. I had a garden too, he began, his voice softening. My parents taught me how to plant flowers and vegetables. It was a peaceful place where I could escape from everything. I remember feeling safe there. Do you still have a garden? Anna asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Peter chuckled lightly, shaking his head. Not like I used to, but maybe we can create one together. Lucas jumped up, his face lighting up with excitement. Yes, let's make a big garden. We can grow vegetables and flowers. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and Peter felt a sense of hope blossom within him. Perhaps this was the beginning of something beautiful, a new family formed not by blood, but by choice and shared experiences. Just as the fire began to dwindle, the moment was shattered by a rustle in the nearby trees. Peter's heart sank as his earlier fears rushed back. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. He glanced around, his instincts flaring. Hans, Peter called, his voice steady despite the rising tension. Did you hear that? Hans's expression grew serious. Yes, I did. Stay close, everyone. The children huddled together, their innocent excitement replaced with apprehension. Peter's heart raced as he scanned the shadows, his protective instincts kicking in once more. Maybe it's just an animal, Greta suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. But Peter wasn't convinced. The feeling of being watched returned, and it settled heavily on his chest. I think we should head inside, he said firmly. It's getting late. As they gathered their things and made their way back to the house, Peter couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that enveloped him. The The warmth of the fire and the laughter of the children felt like a fragile bubble, one that could burst at any moment. Once inside, Peter secured the doors, his mind racing with thoughts of the lurking figure and the threats that seemed to follow the Maulers. He glanced at Hans, who wore a similarly troubled expression. "We need to take precautions," Peter said, his voice low. "I'm going to ensure that everyone stays safe, no matter what it takes." Hans nodded, a mixture of gratitude and worry in his eyes. "Thank you, Peter. We appreciate everything you're doing." As the night wore on, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. The warmth of family was now mingled with the chill of danger, a precarious balance that would test the bonds they had begun to forge. Peter Schneider leaned against the oak desk in his study, the weight of uncertainty heavy on his shoulders. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a table lamp. The walls, adorned with portraits of his ancestors, seemed to watch him with a judgmental gaze as he considered his next steps. He had never anticipated that opening his home to the Mauler family would lead him down such a tumultuous path. The echoes of the recent threats and the lurking figure outside had ignited a fire within him, a fierce determination to protect those he had come to care for deeply. With a decisive nod, Peter picked up his phone and dialed the number of a private investigator he had researched earlier that day. As it rang, he felt a ripple of anxiety mixed with hope. "Come on, answer," he muttered under his breath, pacing the room. Finally, a calm voice broke through. "Detective Schmidt speaking." "Hello, Detective. My name is Peter Schneider. I need your help," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Of course, Mr. Schneider. What can I do for you?" Peter took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I have a family staying with me. Refugee family from war-torn Europe. I believe they are in danger. There's been a figure lurking around my property, and I need to know who they are and what they want." "Understood. I'll need to ask you a few questions about the family and the circumstances. Can we meet in person?" "Absolutely. When are you available?" "Tomorrow morning at 9. I'll come to your estate." After hanging up, Peter leaned back against the desk, his mind racing with thoughts of the Maulers. He could still hear Anna's laughter echoing in the hallways, a stark contrast to the tension that now filled his home. The children had become a breath of fresh air in his otherwise solitary life, and he felt a protective instinct rising within him. The next morning, Peter was up early, pacing the kitchen as he prepared breakfast. He could hear the soft murmurs of Greta and Hans sharing stories with their grandchildren, their voices a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. The smell of fresh bread wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of coffee, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. "Good morning, Peter," Greta called, her cheerful demeanor instantly lifting his spirits. "We made some pastries. Would you like to join us?" "I'd love to," Peter replied, forcing a smile despite the underlying tension that gnawed at him. He joined them at the table, feeling the familial warmth envelop him. "Did you sleep well?" Anna asked, her innocent eyes wide with curiosity. "Not really," Peter admitted, glancing at Hans, who seemed to be lost in thought. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." Greta reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "You've been so kind to us, Peter. We are grateful for your hospitality." "Just doing what I can," he replied, though his heart felt heavy with the burden of their safety. As they shared breakfast, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that danger was looming just beyond the horizon. Soon, Detective Schmidt arrived, his presence cutting through the morning's tranquility. He was a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of professionalism and competence. "Mr. Schneider," he greeted, extending a hand. "Pleasure to meet you." "Thank you for coming," Peter replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate your willingness to help." "Let's talk in private," Schmidt suggested, leading Peter away from the dining area. They retreated to the study, the air heavy with unspoken concerns. "Now, tell me everything," Schmidt said, taking a seat. Peter recounted the series of events, from the refugees' arrival to the strange figure lurking outside. As he spoke, he could see the detective's expression shift from curiosity to concern. "Do you have any idea who this person might be?" Schmidt asked, jotting down notes. "I don't know," Peter replied, his voice laced with frustration. But I can't help but feel it's connected to their past. There's something Hans isn't telling me. The detective nodded thoughtfully. I'll dig into their background. Political refugees often have complicated histories, especially if they were involved in activism. Peter's heart sank at the mention of activism. That's what I fear. Hans mentioned something about their past in hushed tones. I think there's more to it than they're letting on. I'll find out what I can, Schmidt promised, rising from his seat. In the meantime, ensure that you keep the doors locked and stay vigilant. I'll be in touch. As the detective left, Peter returned to the kitchen, where the atmosphere was still light, but a shadow loomed over his heart. The children were laughing, their joy infectious, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the tranquility was a thin veneer over a brewing storm. Everything okay? Greta asked, noticing his distant expression. Just thinking, he replied, forcing a smile. I want to make sure you all feel safe here. Peter, we feel safe with you, Greta reassured him, her eyes warm and sincere. You've given us a home when we had none. That means everything. As the days passed, Peter threw himself into routine, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy for the Mahlers. He spent more time gardening with Lucas, teaching him about the different plants and how to nurture them. The boy's enthusiasm made Peter's heart swell with pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that danger lurked nearby. One evening, while sitting on the porch, Peter noticed Hans standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the distance. The setting sun cast long shadows, and there was an air of melancholy about him. Peter felt an urge to confront Hans, to break through the wall of silence that surrounded their past. Hans, he called, stepping off the porch. Can we talk? Hans turned, his expression unreadable. Of course, Peter. Peter motioned for him to join him on the porch. I can't help feeling that there's something you're not telling me. I want to help, but I need to know the truth. Hans's gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, the silence between them felt heavy. It's not easy to talk about, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. We fled our country because of my involvement in a political movement. It put us on the radar of dangerous people. Peter's heart raced. What kind of danger? Hans looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. The kind that doesn't just threaten our lives. They will come for us. They want to silence those who speak out against them. The gravity of Hans's words hung in the air, and Peter felt a chill run down his spine. So, this figure, it's connected to your past? Yes, Hans admitted, his voice strained. I didn't want to burden you with this. You've already done so much for us. But your family now, Peter said firmly, his protective instincts flaring. I won't let anyone hurt you. We'll figure this out together. Hans nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I appreciate your support, Peter. I truly do. As they stood on the porch, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape. Peter felt a sense of camaraderie grow between them, a bond forged in the fires of shared struggle and resilience. Later that night, as Peter lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of the impending danger. The warmth of the Mahler family's presence flooded his heart, yet the shadows of their past loomed large. He had opened his home to them out of kindness, but now that kindness felt like a double-edged sword. Determined to protect them at all costs, Peter resolved to stand by the Mahlers, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, he would take further action. He would not let fear dictate their lives any longer. The thought of losing the family he had come to love was unbearable, and he would do everything in his power to keep them safe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sprawling estate, Peter Schneider sat at the dining table, his mind racing with thoughts of the Mahlers and the imminent danger they faced. The empty chairs around him felt like a stark reminder of the solitude he had long endured, but now, with the family's presence, the house had come alive in ways he had never expected. The warm aroma of Greta's cooking wafted through the air, mingling with the faint scent of fresh flowers from the garden. Yet Peter found it difficult to appreciate the moment. His heart was heavy with the weight of responsibility. Peter, are you all right? Greta asked, her voice soft yet filled with concern. She had noticed his distraction while preparing dinner, her hands deftly chopping vegetables, a familiar rhythm that seemed to anchor her amid the uncertainty. Peter looked up, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about how to make things safer for all of you," he admitted, his voice low. "I don't want to put you at risk any longer." Anna, the little girl with bright eyes that sparkled with innocence, peered up from her half-finished drawing. "Is it about the man we saw outside?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to shield the children from the harsh realities of life, yet the truth could no longer be hidden. "Yes, sweetie, but I promise you, I'm working on a plan to keep everyone safe." Greta exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Hans, who had been silent, his face clouded with worry. "What do you have in mind?" he finally asked, leaning forward, his eyes searching Peter's for reassurance. Peter took a deep breath. "I think we should relocate for a while. I have a friend in the city who can help us find a safer place. It's just temporary, until we can figure out what to do next." Hans rubbed his temples, a gesture that spoke volumes of the stress he carried. "You're right, but it's not just about moving. We need to understand who this person is and what they want from us," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within. Peter nodded, the resolve hardening in his chest. "I'll talk to the investigator again and see if we can get more information. In the meantime, I'll make arrangements for your departure. We'll leave tomorrow morning at first light." The atmosphere in the room shifted as the gravity of Peter's words settled in. Greta's hands paused in their work, and Anna's drawing fell forgotten on the table. Lucas, who had been quietly observing, looked up from his toy truck, a frown creasing his small brow. "Will we be safe there?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Peter knelt beside Lucas, meeting his gaze directly. "I promise you, we will be safe. I won't let anything happen to you or your family," he said, his voice firm. "You can count on me." Just then, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house, jolting everyone from their thoughts. Peter's heart raced as he exchanged a quick glance with Hans. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and urgent, as he moved toward the sound of the disturbance. As he approached the back door, the familiar feeling of dread washed over him. He had to protect them. With every step, he mentally prepared himself for whatever awaited him. He reached for the door handle, hesitating for just a moment, his mind racing through the scenarios. With a determined push, he flung the door open. What met him was a scene of chaos. The kitchen, once filled with the warmth of family and love, was now a battlefield. A figure clad in dark clothing was rummaging through their belongings, his back turned to Peter. The intruder didn't seem to notice him at first, and Peter seized the opportunity to act. "Get away from them," Peter shouted, his voice booming with a mix of fear and anger. The figure spun around, revealing a face obscured by shadows, but Peter could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. "Peter, no!" Greta screamed from behind him, but he was already moving forward, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He couldn't let this person hurt the family he had come to care for so deeply. The intruder lunged at him, and Peter dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding a blow that could have sent him sprawling. "Who are you?" Peter demanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. "What do you want with us?" The figure smirked, a sinister expression that sent chills down Peter's spine. "You really thought you could protect them? They belong to me," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. Peter's mind raced as he grappled with the intruder. "You're mistaken. They are not yours," he shouted, throwing a punch that connected with the intruder's jaw, sending him staggering back. In that moment, Hans burst into the room, instinctively positioning himself between Peter and the intruder. "Get away from my family," he shouted, his voice fierce, fueled by a primal instinct to protect. "Stay back," Peter warned Hans, but the intruder was quick to recover. He lunged again, aiming for Hans, and Peter reacted without thinking. He tackled the figure, the two of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. "Get the kids out," Peter yelled to Greta, his voice strained yet clear. He could feel the weight of the man on top of him, the struggle a desperate dance of survival. Greta, her face pale, nodded and rushed toward the children, her hands trembling. "Anna," "Lucas, we need to go. Now," she urged, ushering them out of the room, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. As the fight continued, Peter felt a sharp pain slice through his side. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give in, pushing the intruder away with all his strength. "You won't hurt them," he roared, summoning every ounce of courage he had left. With a sudden movement, Peter managed to flip the man over, pinning him to the floor. But before he could revel in the momentary victory, the intruder's hand shot up, revealing a knife glimmering in the dim light. "Fool!" the man spat, his voice filled with venom. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." In that split second, Peter felt time slow. He had to act, and he had to act now. He thrust his shoulder into the man's chest, knocking the wind out of him, and with a surge of adrenaline, he twisted the knife from the man's grip. It clattered to the floor, and Peter quickly scrambled to his feet, breathing heavily. But the intruder was already moving, attempting to rise. Peter kicked him hard in the ribs, sending him crashing back down. "You're not going anywhere," he shouted, finally feeling the presence of Hans at his side, ready to back him up. "Is everyone safe?" Hans asked, his voice taut with worry. "They're out. Just hold him down," Peter gasped, his side throbbing painfully. He glanced over to see that Greta had successfully ushered Anna and Lucas to safety in the nearby study. The intruder struggled beneath them, but together, they managed to restrain him until the police arrived. As sirens wailed in the distance, Peter felt a rush of relief mixed with pain. He leaned against the kitchen counter, panting heavily. "We need to make sure this ends now," he murmured, the weight of his injuries beginning to settle in. "Peter, are you hurt?" Hans asked, concern etched on his face as he caught sight of the blood seeping through Peter's shirt. "I'm fine," Peter lied, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Just a scratch." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. As the police burst through the door, Peter's thoughts drifted to the family he had fought to protect. The stakes had never been higher, and he was left to ponder what this meant for their future. All he wanted was to safeguard the bonds that had formed between them, but at what cost? The sun filtered through the tall windows of Peter Schneider's sprawling country home, casting warm shafts of light onto the wooden floor, where he lay recovering from his injuries. The pain in his side was a constant reminder of the confrontation he had faced just days earlier, but the deep sense of connection he felt with the Mahler family made the pain more bearable. Peter glanced to the side, where Hans, Greta, Anna, and Lucas had taken up residence in his living room, their presence a mixture of concern and companionship. "Peter, are you sure you're okay?" Greta asked, her brow furrowed as she rearranged a blanket over his legs. The worry etched on her face was a stark contrast to the warmth she had extended to him since they had settled into his home. Her hands were busy, but her eyes were fixed on him, searching for any sign of distress. "I'm fine, really," Peter replied with a weak smile, though he couldn't help but wince as he shifted slightly. "Just a little sore. Nothing I can't handle." Lucas, who had taken to sitting cross-legged on the carpet, looked up from the book he had been reading aloud. "You're not going to do anything silly again, right, Peter? Like chasing bad guys?" His innocent question brought a chuckle to the otherwise tense atmosphere. "Only if I have to," Peter said, his voice laced with a hint of playfulness. "But I'd much rather be here, listening to you read." "Okay," Lucas said, a broad grin spreading across his face as he returned to the pages of his book. Anna, sitting beside him, leaned in closer, whispering words of encouragement as he stumbled over unfamiliar words. The sound of their laughter was a balm to Peter's soul, lifting the heaviness that had settled in the aftermath of the attack. He observed the familial bond that was growing between them and felt an unfamiliar warmth swell in his chest. This was the connection he had been searching for, a sense of belonging that had eluded him since his parents' tragic passing. Hours passed, and as the sunlight began to fade, the doorbell rang, breaking the tranquility of the moment. Hans exchanged a glance with Greta, and without a word, he stood and walked to the door. Peter frowned, his protective instincts kicking in as he thought of the threats that still loomed over them. "Stay here," Peter instructed, his voice firm yet gentle. Hans hesitated, but the determined look in Peter's eyes was enough to convince him. He opened the door cautiously, revealing the private investigator, Klaus, who had been helping them uncover the truth about their situation. "Peter," Klaus greeted, stepping inside, his expression serious. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Peter's heart raced. "What did you find out?" Klaus took a moment to gather his thoughts, his gaze shifting between Peter and the Mahlers. "We've tracked down the figure who has been threatening you and the family. His name is Victor, and he has connections to Hans's past." The room fell silent, the weight of Klaus's words hanging heavily in the air. Hans's expression hardened, and Greta's hand found his, squeezing tightly. "What do you mean? His past?" Peter asked, his brows knitting together in confusion. "What does he want?" Klaus ran a hand through his hair, clearly uneasy. Victor was once involved in the same political activism as Hans. They were allies until Hans refused to go along with a plan that Victor had devised, a plan that would have endangered innocent lives. Victor has been seeking revenge ever since. A cold shiver ran down Peter's spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "So, he's not just a random threat. He's coming after you, Hans, through your family." "Yes," Hans said, his voice steady yet filled with underlying tension. "I never thought he would find us here. I thought we were safe." Klaus continued, "We're planning a sting operation to catch Victor and his associates. We believe they will make a move soon, and we need to act quickly. But we need your help, Peter." Peter's heart raced as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. "What do you need me to do?" "We need you to be a part of this," Klaus said, his voice low and urgent. "You know the property, and you can help us set up surveillance. We need to ensure the safety of everyone involved, especially the children." Peter nodded, determination flooding through him. "I'm in. Let's do whatever it takes to protect the Mahlers." As they discussed the details of the operation, the atmosphere shifted from one of fear to one of resolve. The family gathered around Peter, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and gratitude. "Are you sure about this, Peter?" Greta asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already been hurt. This is about all of us," Peter replied, meeting her gaze with conviction. "I won't let anything happen to you. Your family now." The room buzzed with a sense of purpose, and they spent the next few hours preparing for the operation. Peter, despite his injuries, felt invigorated. He was finally taking charge of his life, surrounded by those who mattered most. As twilight descended, they set the plan in motion. Klaus and his team took positions around the property while Peter and Hans monitored from the main house, keeping a watchful eye for any signs of Victor or his men. The children were tucked safely in their rooms, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the walls. Hours passed, and the tension in the air became palpable. Peter felt his heart pounding in his chest as he paced nervously. "What if they don't show?" he wondered aloud. "They will," Hans reassured him, his voice steady despite the tension. "Victor is desperate. He's been waiting for a chance to strike." Just as the clock struck midnight, a rustling noise broke the silence outside. Peter's heart raced as he whispered, "Did you hear that?" Hans nodded, his expression grave. "It's time." They moved stealthily to their positions, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Peter's instincts kicked in, and he focused on the sounds outside, waiting for the right moment to act. Suddenly, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, moving cautiously towards the house. Peter's breath caught in his throat as he recognized Victor among them. "Now!" Klaus shouted, and the night erupted into chaos as the operation unfolded. Peter felt a surge of adrenaline as he and Hans joined Klaus and his team, confronting Victor and his associates. The confrontation was swift and intense, filled with shouts and the sound of scuffling feet. Peter fought with every ounce of strength he had, driven by the need to protect his newfound family. In the midst of the struggle, Peter caught Victor's eye, the hatred burning in the man's gaze. "You think you can keep them safe?" Victor spat, struggling against the grips of the investigators. "You'll never be one of them." With a surge of resolve, Peter stepped forward, standing tall. "They are my family now. You will not hurt them." The The confrontation culminated in a swift resolution as Klaus's team managed to subdue Victor and his men, handcuffing them and calling for local authorities to take over. The danger had been neutralized, but the adrenaline still coursed through Peter's veins. As dawn broke, Peter stood outside, the chill of the morning air invigorating yet calming. The weight of the night's events slowly began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief. Greta stepped up beside him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it, Peter. You protected us." Peter turned to her, his heart full as he took in the grateful expressions of the family he had fought for. "We did it together. This is our family now, and I'll always be here to protect you." As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Peter felt a profound sense of belonging wash over him. He had faced danger, but more importantly, he had found a reason to fight, a family forged in resilience and love. From that day forward, the Schneider and Mueller families were intertwined, united by shared experiences, struggles, and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty and love. They were no longer just a host and refugees. They were family, ready to face whatever came next together.